Lindisfarne, a small island off the northeast coast of England, had become not only a strategic but also a symbolic target for the Vikings by 793. The island was known as a center of knowledge and religion in Europe. Its libraries were filled with rare manuscripts, scientific notes, and sacred texts. The monks were not merely religious practitioners. They studied astronomy, prepared medicinal herbs for the sick, and copied manuscripts that arrived from distant lands. According to some sources, rare plants were cultivated in the monastery's gardens and sent across Europe. For the Vikings, the sea was not only a route of transportation, but also a symbol of power and strategy. Long and fast ships, called dracars, could glide silently even in shallow waters, becoming almost invisible as they approached the shore. The warriors aboard were armed with axes, swords, and spears. Some even carried special tools made of wood and stone to break down monastery doors. During these raids, the Vikings did not act merely for plunder, but also to establish psychological dominance. When the attack began, the monks and villagers were taken by surprise. Some tried to hide sacred texts and valuables, while others prayed, clinging to hope for survival. But the overwhelming numbers and suddenness of the attack quickly broke their resistance. Some monks were killed, some thrown into the sea, and the rest were taken captive to unknown places. The library was completely destroyed. Books on the shelves were torn apart or burned, and some were thrown into the sea. The Vikings' aim was not merely to seize treasure, they wanted to intimidate coastal populations and catch other European settlements unprepared. This raid created a lasting image of the Vikings in people's minds. Ruthless, swift warriors who respected neither religion nor knowledge. Lindisfarne became more than the destruction of a monastery. It became a symbol of the Vikings' strategic intelligence. In the years following the attack, coastal villages, monasteries, and towns had to prepare themselves against future Viking assaults from the sea. Stone walls, tall towers, moats, and sturdy gates were constructed. Harbors were fortified not only for trade, but also for defense. Watchtowers were manned, and sentries carefully monitored the horizon for any sign of black sails. The Viking raids did not stop at Lindisfarne. Monasteries, villages, and towns along the northeast coast of England and Ireland also became targets. The Vikings, fast and organized seafarers, gained both loot and psychological superiority. Coastal communities had to remain constantly alert to threats from the sea, a reality that profoundly altered daily life. Over time, the Vikings launched expeditions not only from northern Europe, but also from more distant regions, systematically targeting the coasts of England, Ireland, and even France. Each raid raised awareness in Europe of the dangers that could come from the sea. Cities were planned with defense as a priority, and monasteries relocated their valuable artifacts to safer, more strategic locations. The Vikings' tactics were remarkable. Their ships were light yet fast, able to navigate shallow waters and approach silently. The warriors moved quickly and in coordination, swiftly identifying defensive points in monasteries and villages. According to some legends, the Vikings used war drums during raids and crept through shadows to terrify their enemies. This psychological warfare was often as effective as physical combat. Following the Lindisfarne raid, many coastal communities created stories describing Viking tactics, shadows from the sea, dark sails, and night raids became legends passed down through generations. In some villages, thorny trees were planted along the coast to slow approaching attackers. Elsewhere, war and defense manuscripts written by monks were transmitted from one generation to the next. The Vikings' way of life also became part of these legends. They were not just warriors, but also sailors, traders, explorers, and sometimes colonists. Living under harsh climates and limited resources in Northern Europe, they had learned to act swiftly and efficiently. Their drakkar ships were used both for trade and for raids, designed to move silently at night and hide along the coast by day. The Lindisfarne raid marked a turning point in the Vikings' place in European history. They were no longer remembered simply as barbaric raiders, but as a planned, strategic, and formidable force. Each new attack reinforced the importance of preparedness for coastal communities. Every new harbor, stone wall, and watchtower in Europe was shaped in the shadow of the Vikings. The sound of waves was no longer just the melody of the sea, but a harbinger of approaching danger. Thus, Lindisfarne became more than an island. It became a symbol of the Vikings' presence and influence in Europe. Through the fear, strategy, and legends they left along the coasts, the Vikings etched an unforgettable mark on history. Every wave, every stroke of the oar, echoed the memory of a nightmare and an indelible chapter of history. The longship glided closer to the island, its dragon-headed prow slicing through the morning tide with eerie silence. The waves grew calmer as the shallow waters embraced the vessel, as if the sea itself were holding its breath for what was to come. The men had ceased their chants. The only sounds were the creaking of oars and the low whisper of wind against the sail. Every warrior's gaze was fixed ahead, where the monastery of Lindisfarne rose in solemn grace against the pale dawn. Lindisfarne was a place of peace, its stone walls weathered but strong, its wooden halls simple yet sacred. Within, monks stirred from their beds, their chants of morning prayer beginning to echo through the cloisters. The voices carried across the still air like fragile threads of devotion. They sang of mercy, of protection, of divine light in a dark world. None could imagine that shadows of fire and steel were already creeping toward their sanctuary. From the ship, the Northmen observed in silence. Some sneered at the distant figures in brown robes moving among the courtyards, like ants scurrying about their nest. To the Vikings, these holy men were soft and defenseless, keepers of treasures, yet unworthy of them. The golden chalices, the illuminated manuscripts, the silver crosses, all glories offered to a god the Northmen did not fear. Odin and Thor demanded strength and sacrifice, not quiet prayers. Jarl Hrothgar raised his hand, and the ship slowed. The warriors gripped their weapons, spears with gleaming iron tips, axes whose blades had tasted blood before, swords carried down from fathers to sons. Some fastened helmets adorned with rivets and leather, while others preferred the freedom of bare heads, trusting only in their skill and ferocity. Shields painted with runes and fierce colors were lifted, ready to clash and shatter. The shoreline drew near. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries loud and frantic, as if warning the monks of the doom that approached. A few fishermen along the coast spotted the dragon-proud ship, their eyes widening in terror. They dropped their nets and fled inland, their shouts faint against the roar of the sea. Still, the monastery bells tolled, calling the monks to prayer, unaware that death now stood at their door. The warriors exchanged glances. Some smiled with anticipation, their hunger for plunder etched into their faces. Others muttered quick invocations to the gods, asking for strong arms, swift blades, and a place in Valhalla should they fall. At last, the Jarl's voice cut through the salt air, low but commanding. Row no more. The time has come. Today, we carve our names into the sagas of the North. Strike swift, strike hard, and let none escape. For Odin watches. The ship's keel scraped the sand. The Vikings leapt into the shallows, the icy water soaking their boots. They advanced in formation, shields raised, weapons gleaming in the rising sun. Behind them, the dragon-prowed longship loomed like a harbinger of chaos. Ahead, Lindisfarne stood serene and unsuspecting, its monks still singing their prayers. But their hymns would soon be drowned by the clash of steel and the cries of the fallen. The North Sea stretched endlessly beneath a gray and brooding sky. Waves crashed with relentless rhythm, their crests like white fangs gnashing at the sleek wooden hull of the Drakkar. The long ship, carved with the figurehead of a snarling dragon, seemed alive, its body flexing with each surge of the ocean, its breath the roaring wind that howled across the deck. To the Vikings aboard, the sea was not merely a road, it was a living god, a temperamental force that demanded respect and fear in equal measure. 40 men sat side by side at the oars, their muscles straining in unison, backs slick with sweat despite the cold spray of salt water. They rowed with the precision of warriors trained since childhood, every movement echoing the heartbeat of the clan. Above them, the black square sail billowed, marked with crimson symbols, invoking Thor's protection and Odin's wisdom. Each gust of wind carried with it the promise of fortune or the whisper of death. The leader of this expedition, Jarl Hrothgar the Red, stood at the prow, his braided beard whipped in the wind, and his scarred face was set with grim determination. He gazed ahead into the mist, where the coast of England lay hidden like a sleeping prey. Behind him, his men murmured in their native tongue, speaking of home, of the farms and hearths they had left behind. Some boasted of the treasures they would claim, silver chalices, jeweled crosses, golden reliquaries. Others spoke quietly of the monks, whom they imagined as frail keepers of sacred knowledge, their walls weak, their courage weaker still. The journey had been harsh. Storms battered the fleet for days, scattering smaller vessels and testing the resilience of the crew. Yet the Vikings endured, for the sea was in their blood. To them, the dangers of the deep were but another trial sent by the gods. At night, they navigated by the stars, Orion's belt pointing their way south, the North Star guiding them toward destiny. Fires burned in iron braziers aboard the ship, casting flickering light on the warriors' hardened faces. Songs of old were chanted in rhythm with the oars, sagas of heroes who had carved kingdoms with axe and flame. The sound carried across the waves, a haunting chorus that seemed to make the ocean itself tremble. As dawn broke on the seventh day, the mist parted, revealing the faint silhouette of land. A hush fell over the longship. Men ceased their boasting and tightened their grips on axe handles and spear shafts. The island of Lindisfarne loomed ahead, its monastery spires barely visible against the pale horizon. To the Vikings, it was more than stone walls and wooden doors. It was a beacon of wealth and sanctity, a place whispered of in trading halls and sagas, a treasure hoard of both gold and knowledge. The Jarl raised his arm, signaling silence. The oars slowed, the ship gliding like a predator, stalking its prey. Brothers, Hrothgar's voice thundered above the wind. The gods smile upon us this day. What lies ahead is not merely plunder. It is glory. The world shall know the strength of the Northmen. Let no man falter, for Odin watches, and the Valkyries hover on the wind. The crew roared their approval, striking the butts of their spears against the deck. The sound was like thunder rolling across the sea. Some warriors painted runes upon their arms with ash and blood, invoking protection. Others kissed amulets of Thor's hammer that hung from their necks. Each man was bound not only by lust for gold, but by the certainty that their deeds would echo in the halls of Valhalla. As the ship cut silently through the shallows, seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries a warning to those ashore who remained unaware of the storm about to descend upon them. Lindisfarne still slept, its monks rising only to morning prayers, oblivious to the dragon-headed shadow gliding toward their sanctuary. The Vikings were coming. The gates of Lindisfarne stood unbarred. Why would they be closed? The monks of the Holy Isle had never known war. Their lives were filled with scripture, prayer, and quiet labor. They had faith that God's hand protected them, but no hand shielded them now. The first Viking, axe in hand, stormed across the grass. His boots crushed the herbs of the monks' gardens, his breath steaming in the chill air. A monk, startled by the noise, stepped into the courtyard, his candle still flickering in hand. His lips parted to speak, perhaps a blessing, perhaps a question, but no word left him. The iron edge of the axe fell, and silence swallowed him. With a roar that shook the morning, the Northmen surged forward. Shields slammed against stone as the warriors poured through the open ways of the monastery. The chants of prayer twisted into screams as the monks realized too late that the dragon ship had brought not pilgrims, but wolves. Bells rang frantically in the chapel tower, but their holy clangor could not halt the storm. One by one, the monks scattered, some clutching wooden crosses to their chests, others clutching nothing but terror. They were men of parchment and ink, not shield and sword. Their sandals slapped against the cobbles as they fled, yet the warriors' strides were longer, faster, merciless. Inside the chapel, golden light from the altar flickered on sacred vessels, chalices, crosses, reliquaries. To the Vikings, these glittered brighter than sunlight on water. They saw not holy relics, but treasure ripe for plunder. One warrior smashed a reliquary against the ground, scattering fragments of bone that the monks had revered as saintly. To the Norsemen, they were worthless dust. Cries rose, "Take the silver, spill their blood, for Odin." The clash of steel echoed through the stone halls. Doors were broken from their hinges. Scrolls and illuminated books, painstakingly crafted for decades, were hurled into the dirt or cast into the fire. Flames licked at the manuscripts, the gold leaf on their pages glinting one last time before turning to ash. Some monks fell to their knees, praying even as swords hovered above them. Kyrie Ellison, Lord, have mercy, they whispered. But mercy was not the language of the Northmen. Their gods demanded sacrifice, and Lindisfarne was the altar. The courtyard became a storm of chaos. Monks, dragged by their robes, warriors shouting in their tongue, shields clashing, weapons rising and falling. The once tranquil monastery had become a slaughter ground. Above it all, the dragon-prowed ship rested on the shore, silent and patient, as if it too were watching the saga unfold. And far across the waves, no one yet knew that the world had just changed, that this day, this strike, was the dawn of the Viking Age. The screams had quieted. What remained were groans, muffled sobs, and the crackling of torches pressed against wood. The monastery of Lindisfarne, once a sanctuary of prayer and learning, was now a carcass stripped bare. The Vikings moved like wolves after the kill, searching, scavenging, seizing. Chalices of gold and silver vanished into leather sacks. Bejeweled crosses were torn from altars. Ivory reliquaries, once kissed with reverence, were smashed open to reveal glittering fragments of wealth. To the Norsemen, every piece was bounty, a gift from fate. But they were not satisfied with treasure alone. "Burn it," growled their leader, his voice cutting through the night air. "Let the world know we were here." A torch was thrown into a pile of manuscripts. Books of scripture, written with painstaking devotion, their pages adorned with colors brighter than sunrise. For a brief moment, the inks glowed like jewels in the firelight. Then they curled, blackened, and turned to smoke. Centuries of faith, knowledge, and art vanished in the time it takes a man to draw breath. The flames leapt from parchment to wood, licking at beams and rafters. Smoke spiraled into the night sky, carrying with it the scent of burning oak, melting wax, and human despair. Monks who had hidden in the shadows stumbled out, their robes catching embers as they begged for mercy. Some were cut down, others were dragged to the ship, bound as captives, spoils to be sold across the sea. The chapel bell rang one final time as its tower collapsed, the bronze tongue silenced beneath the weight of burning stone. Its tolling was drowned by the roar of fire and the guttural songs of the warriors, who raised their voices in triumph for Odin, for Thor, for the North. The glow of the inferno reflected on their faces as if they themselves were spirits of fire. Shadows danced across their helmets, their axes, their shields. To the eyes of any survivor, they did not seem men at all, but creatures born of chaos, demons unleashed upon holy ground. When dawn broke, Lindisfarne was nothing but smoke and ash. Charred beams jutted upward like the ribs of a giant beast slain by the sea. The cries of gulls replaced the chants of monks. The holy isle was defiled, scarred forever. Yet the dragon ship remained unscathed, rocking gently on the tide. Its hull was filled with treasure, with captives, with bloodied warriors who laughed at the night's work. As the tide rose, they pushed the vessel from the shore. The oar struck the sea in unison. The ship turned toward the horizon, and as the flames of Lindisfarne faded behind them, the Northmen knew this was only the beginning. The wolf had tasted blood. The world would remember. The sea embraced them once more, carrying their dragon-proud ships northward. Behind them, Lindisfarne smoldered like a dying torch on the horizon. But before them lay the promise of glory. The Northmen rowed with laughter on their lips, their oars biting into the waves with the rhythm of triumph. The ships groaned under the weight of plunder, chalices of gold, jeweled crucifixes, bolts of fine cloth, and chests of silver coin. Bound in ropes were captives, the young, the strong, the skilled, destined for the slave markets of the north or to serve as thralls in the halls of jarls. Each wave that struck the hull seemed to echo their victory, and each gust of wind sang of fortune gained. As night fell upon the sea, the men raised their voices in songs of battle. Iron bit flesh, blood kissed the ground, and gold was ours by right of the sword. The skalds among them, keepers of memory and song, listened closely, already shaping verses that would be sung by generations yet unborn. Lindisfarne would not be remembered as a holy place of monks, but as the first jewel in the crown of Norse conquest. When at last the ships reached the fjords of their homeland, the villages gathered on the shores to greet them. Children ran wide-eyed at the sight of treasures beyond imagination. Women stared at the silks and ornaments, whispering of distant lands where such wonders were made. The old men nodded with grim pride, knowing that the strength of their people had reached beyond the horizon and struck deep into the heart of Christendom. That night, fires blazed high in the longhouse of Jarl Håkon. The spoils were laid before the gods, bowls of mead for Odin the Allfather, a bull for Thor the Thunderer, blood spilled for Freyr to bless the coming harvest. Smoke rose to the rafters, carrying prayers and promises into the night sky. The warriors feasted until their bellies were heavy and their voices hoarse. Meat crackled on spits, horns overflowed with drink, and the air roared with tales of valor. Eiríkur, who had led the charge through the monastery doors, was given the place of honor beside the Jarl. His axe, still dark with blood, was laid upon the table like a relic of divine favor. The captives sat in shadows, bound and silent, witnesses to a world where strength was law and the gods smiled only on the bold. For the Vikings, there was no shame in the raid, only pride, only proof that their courage brought fortune. The skald rose and struck the harp. His voice carried above the din, weaving a saga that would live in memory long after the Suru embers died. From the sea we came, like wolves in the night. The cross was shattered, the North was fed, gold for the bold, slaves for the strong, and honor eternal, our names in song. The hall shook with cheers. The raid on Lindisfarne was not the end of their journey. It was the beginning of an age of fire, iron, and song. The North had tasted the riches of the South, and they would not be denied again. Word of Lindisfarne spread like wildfire. Messengers rode through the kingdoms of the Northumbrians, the Mercians, and even as far as the courts of the Franks. Each telling of the story grew darker, more terrifying. Monks were slaughtered at the altar, holy relics stolen, sacred books torn and cast into the sea. The very walls of the monastery, built to glorify Christ, had crumbled under the axes of heathens. To the Christian mind, it was not merely a raid, it was the judgment of God, punishment for the sins of men. In the halls of kings, fear turned to rage. King Ethelred of Northumbria is said to have wept upon hearing the news, declaring, "The sea has delivered demons upon our shores, not men, but wolves in the shape of men, who fear not our God nor his holy cross." But even kings knew the truth in their hearts. Their armies were slow, their walls weak, and their faith no shield against the dragon-proud ships. The Vikings came with the tide, struck like thunder, and vanished into the mist before steel could be raised against them. Across Christendom, priests led processions through villages, bearing crucifixes and chanting psalms, begging heaven for protection. Bells tolled day and night, not in celebration, but in mourning. Children whispered of monsters with horns and serpent eyes, while farmers slept with swords at their doors. At Lindisfarne itself, survivors gathered what they could of the dead. The blood of brothers stained the chapel floor. One monk, Brother Cuthbert, wrote with shaking hands, "Never before has such terror come to Britain. The heathens came, with axes dripping red, and we stood helpless. Surely the end of days is near." But the end of days was not near. It was only the beginning. Far to the south, in the Frankish Empire, Emperor Charlemagne heard whispers of the raid. Though his armies had crushed Saxons and spread Christianity by fire and sword, even he paused at the thought of a new enemy rising from the sea. His court debated, were these raiders merely pirates, or the heralds of a storm that would sweep across Christendom? And so, in every hall, from the poorest village to the richest throne, a shadow fell over Europe. The people prayed, the kings trembled, and all knew one truth: the Northmen would return. Seasons passed. The monks of Lindisfarne rebuilt what they could, but their prayers were restless, their nights haunted by dreams of fire and blood. They hoped, foolishly, that the heathens had vanished back into the mist, never to return. But the sea remembers, and so did the Northmen. In distant fjords, word of the raid spread among the jarls and chieftains. Gold and silver, taken from the monastery, shone in the firelight, a promise of endless wealth across the western seas. Warriors who had once raided rival clans now spoke only of England, the land of fat cattle, rich churches, and men who fled rather than fight. The next summer, more ships were carved from oak, their prows shaped like dragons and serpents. Whole fleets set sail, not just bands of wanderers, but armies of ambition. The longships glided across the waves, sails billowing like blood-red wings, oars striking the sea in thunderous rhythm. Villagers along the Northumbrian coast awoke to a nightmare. At dawn, they saw the horizon crawling with dark shapes. Some mistook them for storms, but storms do not carry shields, nor glint with steel. When the dragon ships landed, the earth shook with the roar of hundreds of feet. This time, it was not a single monastery. It was villages, farms, and markets that burned. Cows were driven onto the ships, women and children taken as slaves, and men who resisted were cut down where they stood. Smoke rose into the sky like a black banner, visible for miles inland. Monks wrote of churches desecrated, altars broken, chalices stolen. One record mourned, "The heathens return, fiercer than before. They strike like locusts, devouring all in their path. God tests us, yet his hand feels far away." Fear spread faster than the raiders themselves. Fishermen abandoned the sea. Farmers fled from the coast. Even petty kings paid tribute in gold to buy a fragile peace. But peace with the Vikings was as fleeting as the tide. From Ireland to the Hebrides, from the Shetlands to the Isle of Man, the dragon ships prowled. Each raid fed the next. Each victory drew more warriors to the sea. What began as a single strike at Lindisfarne was becoming something greater, an age of terror, an age of conquest, an age the world would remember as the Viking Age. The raids had begun as flashes of lightning, sudden, violent, and gone with the tide. But soon the lightning became a storm, and the storm refused to pass. By the middle of the 9th century, Viking fleets no longer vanished after their strikes. Instead, they lingered. The coast of Northumbria, the river mouths of Ireland, the fertile plains of East Anglia, all became hunting grounds, then resting grounds, and finally, homes. At first, they built only winter camps, simple forts of timber and earth, where ships could be hauled ashore and warriors could feast while the storms raged. But winter camps grew into villages, and villages into strongholds. In Ireland, Dublin rose from the marshlands, a Viking town of trade and war. Ships from Norway and Denmark poured in, laden with furs, amber, and slaves. Markets filled with goods, plundered from across the seas. A new order had arrived, one not of kings but of jarls, warlords who ruled with axe and law alike. In England, the great heathen army came not just to raid, but to conquer. Hundreds of ships landed, tens of thousands of warriors marching inland. They clashed with Saxon kings, burned towns, and seized land for their own. But it was not all destruction. Where swords carved out dominion, plows soon followed. Viking farmers sowed barley in the English soil. Norse women, brought across the sea or taken from the raids, bore children who would speak two tongues, Old Norse and Old English. Cultures collided, yet slowly began to intertwine. Still, fear never vanished. Monks in York and Canterbury wrote bitterly of the Northmen who now lived among them. They come not only with axes, but with wives and children. They seek not only silver, but the earth beneath our feet. What was once Christ's land now drinks the blood of pagans. Yet to the Vikings, it was destiny. They had crossed the whale road, fought the Saxon lords, claimed new ground. The gods had rewarded their boldness. Odin smiled upon their courage. Thor's hammer rang in every clash of steel. What had begun with fire at Lindisfarne had become something greater. The birth of new kingdoms, half Saxon, half Norse, destined to shape the future of Europe.